of them who settled there in the early 1800s. So it's the same people anyway. They would be
Yes.
doing the same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Excellency,
Ambassador Mustafil, you are saying something?
I just wanted to check the audio if I'm being listened loud and clear. So just for a second, sir.
Fine. You're fine.
Yeah. Can you hear me well? Loud and clear?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So we'll start in a second or two. Just after 2 minutes, sir. We'll start just after 2 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Hi, this is Martha Newton from the ILO. I just want to do a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you can be here. We can hear you loud and
Yes.
clear.
Great. Your Excellency, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
So we have to unmute it. Mute it now or what?
So
When you start, please let us know so we can mute it.
it would be good if we mute it, and only when we speak, we unmute, sir. Thank you.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
Excellency, maybe we can start now. Excellency,
Everybody's in. If you think if everybody's in, you can start.
I think so, sir. So we can start.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on climate change, priorities to health, human rights, and labor. At the beginning, I'd like to mention that the event has been recorded. This is the first time the Climate Vulnerable Forum is bringing together the three key UN bodies: World Health Organization, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and International Labour Organization in a single event. It is being done with the objective of deepening our understanding and knowledge about the interlinkages between climate change, health, human rights, and labor. We hope this event would also help create further momentum to our efforts in tackling the increasingly devastating impacts of climate change in all aspects of our life. Excellencies, distinguished participants, I'm delighted to inform you that His Excellency Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen MP, Honorable Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, has kindly joined us today. We are also happy to have with us Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of World Health Organization, Ms. Nada Al-Nashif, UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, and Ms. Martha E. Newton, Deputy Director General of International Labour Organization. We also have a distinguished panel of eminent personalities who would contribute to our discussion. The panelists include His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Nasheed, Honorable Speaker of the People's Majlis of the Maldives and CVF Thematic Ambassador for Ambition. Ms. Saima Wajid Hussain, Member WHO Expert Advisory Panel on Mental Health and CVF Thematic Ambassador for Vulnerability. Her Excellency Ms. Monique van Dalen, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Geneva. His Excellency Mr. Julian Braithwaite, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom in Geneva. His Excellency Mr. Gian Lorenzo Coronado, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Italy in Geneva. And Mr. Samuel Lanui Jr., Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of the Marshall Islands in Geneva. His Excellency Mr. Geneve Kebede Korsho, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Ethiopia in Geneva, has joined us as the CVF Troika Ambassador. Now, may I invite His Excellency Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen, MP, Honorable Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, to make his welcome remark. Sir,
Thank you, Ambassador Dr. Mustafiz. Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. His Excellency Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General WHO, Ms. Nada Al-Nassif, UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Martha Newton, Deputy Director General, ILO, Excellencies, distinguished CVS ambassadors, distinguished colleagues and participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. It is my great pleasure to virtually welcome you all to today's webinar. Indeed, it is a moment of massive global upheaval on public health and economy, a pandemic and a crisis, which is certainly unprecedented in living memory. The COVID-19 has been a stark reminder that we are just one part of the complex system. And when the balance tips, it can have catastrophic consequences for all of us. It should also be a reminder for us that the phenomenon of climate change has the potential of becoming much more appalling and disastrous than the current pandemic. If we fail to act now, perhaps we would not get any second chance to remedy. Therefore, the pandemic is a wake-up call for all of us to accelerate efforts to invest in resilience building in order to avert the impending crisis like the climate change. In 1974, in the first ever address of Bangladesh in the UN General Assembly, our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, said, and I quote, "As a country which has repeatedly been exposed to the ravages of natural calamities, Bangladesh has a special stake in the creation of an institutional arrangement by which the international community can move effectively to meet and prevent such calamities," unquote. We took guidance from his vision to join the international community to reinvigorate meaningful climate actions and combat climate-induced natural calamities. It may be time for the UN to create an UN Secretary General Special Rapporteur to continuously monitor the climate change and update the member states. Being an extremely climate vulnerable country, Bangladesh has placed environmental protection at the heart of its developmental policies. With our own resources, we created Climate Change Trust Fund and implemented innumerable projects for combating climate change impacts. Recently, we launched the transformational Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan to mobilize resources for a sustainable future. Every year, we are spending nearly $2 billion for climate change sensitive projects and around $3 billion for adaptation measures. In recognition of her sustained endeavors in fighting climate change, our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was conferred the title, the award, the Champions of the Earth award by the UN. In continuation of our engagement on climate issues last year, we assumed the presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, CVF, for the second time. As the CVF chair, Bangladesh would continue advocating for capping the global temperature increase up to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We'd also push for accelerated climate finance, particularly in support of the CVF countries. Also making efforts to achieve significant progress in discussions on loss and damage would remain high on our agenda. Recently, the CVF urged all nations to fulfill their commitments under the Paris Agreement and submit more ambitious nationally determined contributions by midnight on 31st December 2020. I'm happy to share with you that Nearly 70 nations responded to the call by strengthening their national NDCs. On behalf of the CBF, I thank all of them for their renewed commitments and contributions. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change, health, world of work, and human rights are all intertwined. The extreme climatic events and frequent natural disasters induced by climate change have led to changing patterns of diseases, water and food insecurity, vulnerable human settlements, and so on. And these have been posing serious threats to public health. We are concerned at the finding of the WHO that the cost of direct damage to health owing to climate change are estimated to be between 2 to 4 billion US dollars per year by 2030. And this estimation excludes the cost in different health determining sectors. The ILO's Centenary Declaration for the Future World rightly recognized the profound impacts of climate change on the nature and future of work. Economic growth, employment, livelihoods, and labor productivity can be severely affected by climate change. The workers should face increasing occupational risk, causing even heart stroke and ultimately death due to global warming. Climate change also threatens the enjoyment of a wide range of human rights, including those to life, water and sanitation, food, health, housing, work and self-determination, culture, and of course, development. The Paris Agreement rightly calls for mainstreaming human rights into climate actions. As a proponent of the annual resolution of human rights and climate change in the Human Rights Council, we reiterate that to protect human rights, we need to protect our planet from the climate disasters. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 2030 Agenda also presents the interlinkages between climate change, health, labor, and human rights. Keeping this critical nexus in mind, I wish to place 5 suggestions before you. First, we must redouble our efforts to deliver on the commitments made in different international agreements, including the Paris Agreement. Second, we must strive for strengthening international cooperation to tackle climate change with a special focus on mitigation and adaptation while addressing the related funding gaps. We must remember that adaptation is not enough. We must put high emphasis, of course, on mitigation. Third, we must ensure strong financial, technological, and technical support to the climate vulnerable developing countries in their efforts to transition to low carbon, environmentally sustainable economies and societies. Fourth, we should assist the vulnerable countries in strengthening their health system to mitigate climate-induced health risks. Fifth, we urge the international community to consider positively and urgently the creation of a new special rapporteur on human rights and climate change in the Human Rights Council. Before I conclude, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Tedros, Ms. Al-Nashif, and Ms. Newton again for joining the webinar. I'm also pleased to see a distinguished panel of eminent personalities, including His Excellency Mohammed Nasheed, CBF Thematic Ambassador for Ambition, Ms. Saima Wajid Hussain, CBF Thematic Ambassador for Vulnerability, Professor Dr. Barkosian, CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, and permanent representatives of the Marshall Islands, Ethiopia, the Netherlands, UK, and Italy. I would also like to thank our permanent mission for organizing this event in collaboration with the CBF Secretariat. I look forward to a lively panel discussion. I thank you all. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your remarks and reaffirming Bangladesh's commitment to pursuing accelerated climate actions and addressing the issue of loss and damage as the current CBF chair. I also thank you for sharing with us the initiative of Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan for Bangladesh that has been launched coinciding with the birth centenary of the father of the nation of Bangladesh, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. I further appreciate your valuable suggestions, including on strengthening international cooperation to tackle climate change and creation of a new mandate on climate change in the Human Rights Council. Thank you again, sir. Before I invite the next speaker, I would like to inform that the event has been live streamed. May I now invite His Excellency, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of World Health Organization, to make his remarks. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, Dr. Abdul Momen, Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, Excellencies, Ambassadors, dear colleagues and friends. Let me start by thanking the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh and the Climate Vulnerable Forum for organizing the webinar on this critical issue. Climate change and health has been one of my priorities since I took office. For nearly a decade, WHO has worked with the government of Bangladesh on climate change and health and implemented 3 projects there. These 3 projects not only produced important data on the interlinkage of the 2 sectors, but also the development and implementation of comprehensive plans to strengthen the resilience of health systems to climate change. The COVID-19 pandemic is a stark reminder of the intimate and delicate relationship between people and planet, which we can only address with a One Health approach. Recently, WHO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and the World Organization for Animal Health and the UN Environment Programme joined forces to establish a One Health Global Leaders Group on antimicrobial resistance. And I would especially like to thank Her Excellency, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, for her leadership of that group. Of course, the need for a One Health approach goes far beyond antimicrobial resistance. Earlier this year, WHO released a manifesto for a healthy and green recovery from COVID-19, calling on governments to protect nature, support clean energy sources, reduce pollution, and build sustainable food systems and healthier cities. We have already seen promising results where governments have adopted these prescriptions: more accessible urban spaces, cleaner air, more resilient food systems, and healthier lives. Our manifesto highlights that investments that help to prevent disease, protect health, and mitigate climate change will also contribute to the much needed economic and social recovery from the pandemic. Let me present you with 4 pressing priorities for the intersection of climate change and health. First, the health benefits of climate action as the most effective tool to secure ambitious commitments for change. WHO has a body of solid evidence on the health gains that arise from ambitious climate actions under the COVID-26 priority themes of nature, adaptation and resilience, zero carbon transport, energy, and finance. This can bring huge health gains, reduced healthcare costs, more resilient food systems, and more livable cities. Second, scaling up finance for health resilience and adaptation. The majority of countries have identified the health sector as one of the most vulnerable to climate impacts. Despite this, however, a meager 0.5% of multilateral climate finance currently goes directly to health protection. WHO has significantly scaled up its support to countries in this field with the help of donor governments, but a large finance gap remains. Third, support for small island developing states and other vulnerable countries. WHO launched a special initiative on climate change and health in small island developing states in 2017, aimed at providing in-country support and capacity building to some of the most climate vulnerable nations in the world. In 2021, we revitalized this initiative, including through a leadership group and a planned virtual health summit in June. Fourth, a COP26 special report on climate change and health. WHO will produce a special report on climate change and health by COP26 that will provide an overview of the global knowledge, resources, and tools on the interconnections between climate change and human health. It will also present a series of recommendations so that health and well-being benchmarks become an integral part of the UN climate negotiations going forward. I would very much welcome your thoughts on the best way to implement the calls to action from this report. By the end of this year, countries are due to submit their new commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement in advance of the 2021 UN Climate Conference in the UK. These are the commitments we make to protect the planet and its people. The leaders of island nations and other vulnerable countries have been very clear. The decisions we make this year may determine whether their children will have a place they can call home. Thank you once again, Your Excellency, for your leadership. WHO remains committed to working with you and all partners. I thank you.
Thank you, Director General. Thank you for your excellent elaboration on how climate change is intrinsically linked to health and well-being of the people. It was also good to know that WHO has undertaken various initiatives and actions to combat climate change with the ultimate objective of ensuring the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Now, I would like to request Ms. Nada Al-Nashif, UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, to deliver her remarks. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you so much, Your Excellencies, colleagues, friends. It's a real pleasure to be with you today with my colleagues from the WHO and the ILO. I would like to start by recalling the Secretary General's reference to climate change as a war on nature that, if not stopped, will lead humanity to its own demise. And we know that because our biodiversity is collapsing with 1 million species at risk of extinction. And we know that each year, air and water pollution alone kill 9 million people. Climate change impacts health directly through weather variables, including heat and storms, indirectly through natural systems such as disease vectors, and through pathways mediated by human systems, including undernutrition. It is affecting the underlying determinants of health, such as access to drinking water, food, and shelter. I'm sure we will hear some important commitments and proposals today, as His Excellency the Foreign Minister has already started, to help speed up global solutions. Moving forward, we believe human rights-based policies are key. The principles of international solidarity and common but differentiated responsibilities require that countries that historically have contributed the most to climate change do more to alleviate the suffering of those who have contributed the least, while often experiencing the worst impacts. To put it in the words of Solomon Yo, a young human rights defender working in the Pacific, climate change poses an existential threat to the Pacific Islands. And while their population has contributed very little to the problem, they live with this injustice every day. Human rights-based climate policies are the only sustainable solution to the climate challenge. By implementing climate measures that respect, protect, and fulfill all human rights, including the right to development, we can grasp a future in which climate change no longer reinforces health inequalities and compounds injustice, where the economy delivers on its promise to create decent jobs and a just transition, and where life on this planet can be preserved for future generations. Those most affected by climate change already endure discrimination based on gender, age, and economic status, because they are members of indigenous peoples or minorities, migrants, or internally displaced, or because they are people with disabilities. We must have an equitable, sustainable recovery founded on equality, non-discrimination, participation, access to information, and access to justice and accountability. Collectively, we all need to do more, starting with our own house. We are calling for the integration of the human right to a healthy environment throughout the work and the advocacy of the entire United Nations system. A coherent, rights-based approach to environmental action, including in the work of UN country teams, will lead to better outcomes for both people and planet, supporting efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, especially in this decade for action. In particular, upcoming international negotiations on climate, biodiversity, and chemicals management offer critical opportunities for action, for example, to support states in aligning their climate commitments with their human rights obligations. At the UN Human Rights Office, we established a Sustainable Environmental Management Working Group to help us model the change we want to see in the world. Our target is to cut travel by 50% from 2019 levels, institutionalize measurement of our carbon footprint, and change our procurement practices to be human rights enhancing and environmentally conscious. We are determined to walk this talk if we are to have any chance of averting the worst impacts of the unfolding climate tragedy. The human right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment has been recognized by over 80% of UN member states. For this reason, the UN Human Rights Office stands with the Climate Vulnerable Forum in demanding urgent action under the Paris Agreement to stop climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam. I very much appreciate your call for redoubling our efforts to address climate change issues for the promotion and protection of human rights for all. I also thank you for sharing with us the role OSCHR is playing in advancing the climate change and human rights agenda. Having said that, now I have the honor to invite Ms. Martha E. Newton, Deputy Director General for Policy of the International Labour Organization, to make her remarks. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, ministers, distinguished participants, friends, and my colleagues from the UNHCR and the WHO, I thank the government of Bangladesh and the Climate Vulnerable Forum for inviting the International Labour Organization to this very important and timely event. And my congratulations goes to Bangladesh on its presidency of the CVF and that of the Vulnerable 20 group of ministers for finance. Climate change presents significant challenges for the world of work. Unabated, its impacts on the economy, people, and society could roll back important gains achieved in advancing decent work, social justice, and poverty reduction. In 2019, the ILO published its report, Working on a Warmer Planet, the Effect of Heat Stress on Productivity and Decent Work. That study projected that an increase in heat stress resulting from global warming could lead to the loss of 2.2% of total working hours worldwide by 2030, a loss equivalent to 80 million full-time jobs. The sector expected to be the worst affected globally is agriculture, which employs 940 million people around the world. Southern Asia and Western Africa, which are among the world's regions most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, will be the most affected by consequences of heat stress. In both subregions, approximately 5% of working hours are expected to be lost by 2030, corresponding to around 43 million and 9 million jobs, respectively. Such economic damage is likely to reinforce the already existing economic and social vulnerabilities, higher rates of working poverty, informal and vulnerable employment, subsistence agriculture, and a lack of social protection. This pioneering research on an issue of fundamental importance would not have been possible without the leadership of the CVF, which placed the question of heat stress and its impact in the workplace on the policy agenda. Indeed, it was in 2016 that the CVF rallied the ILO, the WHO, and UNDP and social partners to initiate thinking on the effects of warming in the workplace. Such initial study laid the ground and paved the way for a growing body of work to address climate change and workplace issues. While recognizing the immense challenges of climate change, there's an absolute necessity to set our narrative right. Taking bold economic, social, and environmental policies to face climate change will yield gains for employment, incomes, and resilience. Studies by the ILO have shown that achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreement on climate change in the energy sector could deliver an additional 18 million net jobs by 2030. A recent study by the ILO and the Inter-American Development Bank suggests that a low carbon economy in Latin America and the Caribbean can lead to a net 15 million job gain by 2030. So in order to achieve all this potential, we've got to deploy the full range of climate, labor, and economic policies in a coherent, coordinated, and impactful manner. And this is why the tripartite constituents of the ILO have formulated a set of guidelines for a just transition. The guidelines provide a comprehensive framework to address the linkages between decent work and climate change in ways that maximize socioeconomic gains and minimize the risks. The ILO has deployed such guidelines not only to inform international policy processes and negotiations on climate change, but also to support direct action by member states at a national level. In this context, I'm pleased to inform that the ILO currently implements development cooperation projects specifically addressing climate change and transition to a green economy in several CVF member countries. This includes Burkina Faso, Morocco, Tanzania in Africa, Fiji, the Philippines, and Samoa in Asia and the Pacific, and Barbados, Colombia, Costa Rica, in Latin America and the Caribbean. And these are just to name a few. Many of these countries are among the 48 countries that have committed to formulate just transition plans, placing jobs and livelihoods at the center of climate action. The ILO and a number of partners within and outside the UN system have initiated the Climate Action for Jobs initiative as one of the initiatives resulting from the 2019 Climate Action Summit. The Climate Action for Jobs is designed to help countries with real solutions to tackle the twin challenges of climate change and decent work. I'm also pleased to mention that ministers from Costa Rica, Ghana, Samoa, and Senegal, all member countries of the CVF, are on the International Advisory Board of the Climate Action for Jobs. So we're very much looking forward to participating in this conversation today and in deepening our collaboration, including through the Climate Prosperity Strategic Investment Plans for CVF members, which the CVS has launched with a view to promote robust economic and job growth while building climate resilience. The ILO stands ready to continue our partnership to address these efforts. Thank you so much for having us here today.
Thank you very much, Madam, for highlighting ILO's work in several key areas of labor and climate change, including your research work on the effects of heat stress in the workplace, the Green Initiative, and the Climate Action for Job Initiative. Indeed, enhancing the understanding of the linkages between climate change and labor market would be the key to ensure a better and sustainable world of work. With this, the first segment of today's event comes to an end. Now, let us proceed with the panel discussion. Our first speaker of today's panel is His Excellency, Mr. Mohammad Nasheed, Honorable Speaker of the People's Majlis of Maldives, and CVF Thematic Ambassador for Ambition. Mr. Nasheed, the former president of Maldives, had played an instrumental role in establishing the CVF in 2009. Recently, he has been appointed as the CVF Thematic Ambassador for Ambition to take forward the ambitious climate prosperity plans for the CVF countries. Now it's my honor to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Nasheed, to highlight his plan and priorities as the CVF Thematic Ambassador for Ambition. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Before I begin, good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, the government of Bangladesh, the CVF Secretariat, especially Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, the Foreign Minister who just spoke to us. You have, with the CVF in this conference, brought the three most important civil servants of the planet, which is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Director General of the World Health Organization, and also the Director General of the International Labour Organization. The CVF today is trying to bring in the nexus, or rather dig out the nexus between labor, human rights, and climate change and health. How best do we try to highlight health issues, labor issues, and human rights issues with regard to climate change? Now, as the ambassador pointed out, my main function for the CVF is to see how we may be able to promote what we call the prosperity plans. The prosperity plans aims to bring development, or rather have the same economic outcomes, which is high GDP growth, low inflation, high wages, and so on, but with less extraction and more recycling. It's an effort, it's an intention to become carbon neutral, to become carbon zero, but at the same time making sure that we do also proceed with our development plans. The Maldives, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, most of the climate vulnerable countries, we want to become middle income countries, but at the same time, we want to be examples of how to have these kind of prosperity plans which would take care of the planet as well as our development efforts. So basically, the plan comes out with, at the end of the day, procurement orders and tender notices. It tries to give governments frameworks, legal frameworks that would allow governments to tender for procurement of energy, electricity, which would be generated through renewable means. It would also have frameworks on how to, let's say, go on with our farming efforts, with our fishing efforts, but in a more sustainable manner, so that there is adaptation as well as mitigation in these climate prosperity plans. The plans are now done. Bangladesh has taken up the plan, and Bangladesh is proceeding with it as Mujib, with their founder, Mujib Prosperity Plans. We hope that more countries would join with us, join CVF in coming out with these prosperity plans. Now, the WHO, for instance, in terms of health, how to make health services more resilient to climate change? What are the important things we think that should be done? First, I think there is a need to, if anything, what COVID has shown us is how important it is to decentralize things, to have it in smaller units, to have it in isolation, so that communication and all sorts of other disruption would not have an impact on delivery of health services. So I think one of the most important things is decentralization, isolated smaller units, and think so that it comes out in that manner. Now, what climate change is going to do, it's going to create a disaster, and when this disaster strikes, people will lose land, people will lose their homes, people will lose their resources, people will lose their lives, people will lose their families. Now, when people lose, they begin to move. The exodus would begin. And if you can see, if you can envisage, picture, let's say 1 million Syrians going towards Europe, and what happened out of that. Now, we're talking about a quarter of the world's population on the move. And when that happens, we will lose a wide range of fundamental rights. There's no doubt about it. We will lose water and sanitation rights. We will lose food rights, health, housing, self-determination, and culture, and the right for development as well. So basically, how to become more resilient in protecting labor rights and climate change, I would always argue that democracy is the most important adaptation measure. Without democracy, you do the wrong thing at the wrong place at the wrong time. You deliver the wrong project to the wrong people. And you, of course, therefore, keep on wasting a whole lot of money on these things. WHO has done a lot of nutrition programs, family planning programs, vector-borne disease control programs, and these programs form the backbone of our health. Now, in the Maldives now, with temperatures rising, recently we have seen a 200% increase in dengue in 2018. Dengue cases in the Maldives increased by 200%. Now, this is just one vector-borne disease, and we know that the science is there to very clearly tell us that when the temperature heats up, it is going to bring in a whole lot of new diseases, and also it is going to make worse the existing diseases that we are having to face. Now, in short, I think what we should be also looking at would be how the financial systems of the world should deal with this. How the IMF, how the World Bank, how the Asian Development Bank, and other many investment banks should deal with this. Banks, in my view, should now stop funding obsolete technology. They should stop funding diesel generation. They should stop funding even liquefied petroleum gas. There's a whole lot of projects that are still going on in developing countries where the financial institutions are bringing in funding these obsolete technologies in the developing countries. So I think there's a really very big, important need for the World Bank, the IMF, and other financial institutions to be mindful about this. One of the things that would happen, we think, I feel, is that once we start migrating into a carbon-free world or into new technology, we would always have those who were working out the existing technology. So how do we take this labor, from generating diesel, for instance, to generate renewables? So these kind of transition plans for labor, I feel, would be very important when we work towards solutions on labor issues and human rights issues and health issues to do with climate change. I have 5 minutes. There's a whole lot to say, but I will stop. Again, thank you very much, Minister. Bangladeshi Foreign Minister, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the CVF Secretariat, our friend Azad, has, as I mentioned, brought in the biggest three civil servants on the planet, and it is really the civil servants who will be in the forefront of delivering any of these projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for sharing your valuable insights. We believe that your leadership will help the severe countries achieve their goals through accelerating urgent climate actions. Our next panelist is Ms. Saima Wazid Hussain, the CVF Ambassador for Vulnerability. Ms. Hussain is the chairperson of the Bangladesh National Advisory Committee for Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disorders, as well as a member of WHO's Expert Advisory Panel on Mental Health. She was also chosen as WHO's Goodwill Ambassador for Autism in the Southeast Asia region and served as the advisor to the Director General of WHO. Ms. Hussain is also the chairperson of Suchana Foundation, a non-profit NGO based in Dhaka. Now, I have the honor to give the floor to Ms. Saima Wazid Hussain. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be here and to listen to such distinguished speakers and to hear the commitments that we've been needing for a long time. So, Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, good day to all. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. We're all in different time zones, and participating in a meeting from virtually is really a testament to how much we can accomplish while having the least amount of impact on the climate. Speaking for the concerns of vulnerability for our CVF Forum as thematic ambassador, it is clear that the international health, rights and labor responses have not yet caught up with the pressures of climate change. And yet, of course, our distinguished speakers earlier on representing these organizations, their commitments was, really wonderful to hear, and I hope we can all work together to follow that up. There has been very good progress in the work of the WHO and the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights and ILO. I think it is clear that we need to build on these accomplishments and work very hard to further strengthen our responses. We know very well that climate change will continue to exacerbate the situation of vulnerable people, particularly those who are women, children, persons with disabilities, those living with mental health conditions, and who have other neurodevelopmental disabilities. This is not a challenge to leave up to the WHO, the OHCHR, and ILO. As representatives, the solutions do not reside with one institution alone. As representatives of the most vulnerable communities around the world, we need to constantly work hard to bring our concerns forward for action. The global institutions in Geneva who can make a difference can also benefit from our support and collaboration. My own background being in health, specifically mental health, I'm pleased to share with you my views towards the area of health, as well as human rights and labor. And I really thank the High Commission in Geneva for bringing the panelists and bringing these issues together on one subject. Our starting point for climate change and health is, of course, the most substantial public health crisis that we are all experiencing right now. But climate change as a health crisis does intersect with the COVID-19 pandemic, most notably when extreme weather events strike communities. And as was mentioned about issues like the increase in existing diseases like dengue has had in the Maldives. Extreme weather events strike communities where the spread of COVID-19 is substantial and growing. And there's also the major role of air pollution on respiratory diseases that we have been aware of for a very long time, but don't seem to have really made significant change. One notable similarity of COVID-19 and climate change is the impact of each of them on mental health. The pandemic's loss of life, widespread morbidity, job and income loss, isolation, are having a real and profound psychological impact on all of us. The same is true of natural calamities, which have been found to predictably increase the prevalence of mental illness among affected communities in the time following a disaster. We've become aware of the huge significance of the impact of the pandemic on mental health, But when it comes to climate change, we've barely begun to unpack the mental health implications. Although there are some programs run by government and or small institutions, they are really minuscule considering the huge need that exists. Not only is the mental health effect of climate change very, very significant, but we know as persons with disabilities and those with neurodevelopmental disabilities, those with living with other vulnerabilities, are definitely among the most vulnerable and impacted significantly more and have significantly fewer supports systems that are in place. The situation is multiple and compounded, particularly for these vulnerable groups. Therefore, I hope the participants of our events today would also support action to address mental health challenges relating to climate change, would hope that the issue of the vulnerabilities related to the gender, related to being minors, related to having complex conditions like autism spectrum disorders and mental health conditions would would be advanced in a much more concrete and comprehensive way. There are complex interaction between the climate pandemic and climate. Sorry. What is certain is that solutions that are appropriate for the specific communities need to also be implemented in a way that is sensitive to the culture and to the needs of the community. What is good for one country or one region is not necessarily impactful for another. And we have to be extremely sensitive to what are the needs of the people in the community, and especially incorporating those who are at the most vulnerable and who are, in effect, the most voiceless. Oftentimes. In the areas of human rights, we've done great work in recognizing different rights and when it regards the implications of climate change. Yet we have very few tools at our disposal to do anything really concrete about them. I think we're also aware of the intergenerational rights challenge of climate. The world's fastest growing population of youth have far more to lose than older people. And this has been a huge motivator for change and action. Because everyone is affected, including future generations to come, we have to become far more active and practical in helping countries to respond. The CVF is proposing to create a dedicated UN Special Rapporteur because it is the most significant new step that could be taken to intensify the work on climate change and human rights at this point in time. We need to help states recognize the rights concerns around climate change, which will in turn help motivate greater action and efforts to support those most vulnerable whose rights are most at stake. Again, the Human Rights Council has already recognized the special vulnerabilities and rights of people with disabilities, both physical and mental. It has been working since 2008 to build an important knowledge base upon which more action can be taken. In addition, a manifesto for the World Health Organization has also clarified on a roadmap of how we can address the complex issue. Finally, I'd like to turn to the question of climate change, vulnerability, and labor. That is a very significant concern for climate vulnerable countries and vulnerable groups in particular. If you look at the makeup of our economies, our workforce has a very high proportion that are working out of doors or are working indoors, but without proper air conditioning. We also have a high proportion of the world's population without access to clean or quality drinking water, which is vital for rehydration. As temperatures rise, all these workers have their health at risk and actions need to be taken to counteract this. And then now we have the added complexity of requiring them to use things like masks, which are a challenge when you are in an extreme heat and are required to engage in physical labor. This includes measures like promoting clean water access and rehydration, increasing tree cover and shade, and improving HVAC, and even looking into insulation of buildings and workplaces to combat against heat. Again, it is really clear that it's a multidimensional issue, and in order to really address this complex challenge of climate change, we have to cut across, address it in a cross-cutting manner with multiple partners and work in collaboration with one another. There is no one particular solution, and then it cannot be the responsibility of one particular organization. Each of us have to take that leadership and work together to address it. So I hope, I'd like to thank the High Commission Geneva for putting this session together, for bringing such important topics together, and for inviting me to speak and participate. It's a real honor, and it's been a true pleasure. And I hope that going forward, we can do something much more impactful and change the course that we're headed at. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for your insightful intervention, also for emphasizing that the climate change has to be tackled in a cross-cutting way. We are confident that your guidance as the CVF thematic ambassador will help us mobilize different stakeholders and groups to raise global awareness on climate vulnerabilities. Our next panelist is Her Excellency Ms. Monique van Dalen, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Geneva. We are aware that the Netherlands has made good progress in its efforts to address the climate-induced vulnerabilities. Today, while the planet continues to warm, the hotter climate is affecting billions of people in their workplaces with serious health and productivity implications. Madam Ambassador, as your country has pioneered in adapting to the climate change, we would like to know from you, what actions do you think should be prioritized in order to better address the growing impacts of heat in the workplace? Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for this pertinent and fitting question, Excellency, and for inviting me to participate in this very important webinar. As you know, the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Europe is indeed a delta country, just like Bangladesh. But in the Caribbean, our kingdom consists of small island countries, much like the Maldives or the Marshall Islands. So we can relate to climate vulnerability in more than one respect. Excellencies, colleagues, and all those in the virtual audience, let me first express my sincere gratitude to the government of Bangladesh for taking up the presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum at such a crucial time, and to the Honorable Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, His Excellency Dr. Abdul Momen, for his on-point welcoming remarks. Having listened to the Minister's intervention closely, I could not agree more that the need to address the consequences of climate change in a multilateral setting is growing. Climate change is, in a way, the perfect textbook example of the added value and definitive necessity of coordinating national responses through multilateral fora. My fellow panelists today, as well as many members of the virtual audience, will be well aware that of the Climate Adaptation Summit that the government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands hosted 2 weeks ago. The summit, which gathered dozens of heads of state and government, ministers, senior officials, experts, and academics, aimed to accelerate climate adaptation action worldwide. Adaptation in the broadest sense of the word. Socioeconomic opportunities, human rights, food, health, housing, and sanitation. The Climate Adaptation Summit has illustrated widespread agreement that investing in adaptation is smart economics. Accelerating adaptation action is not only necessary from a climate and environmental point of view, it also makes for a fantastic business case. Private sector opportunities in climate adaptation are plenty, and interest is growing. In order to capitalize on these opportunities and invest in resilient, climate-proof communities around the world, thousands of participants in the Climate Adaptation Summit agreed to work towards the following objectives. 1, to close the adaptation gap for the most vulnerable by enabling poor, vulnerable, and young people to take action themselves. 2, to mainstream adaptation into all policymaking, investment, and budgetary decisions at all levels of government. 3, promote broad-based partnerships between public and private actors. 4, stimulate innovation through new financial instruments to mitigate risk and ensure resilience to climate impacts. And 5, drive economic and finance solutions by scaling up the volume and predictability of financing, promoting access to public and private financing, included by blended financing tools. Now, specifically turning to your question on addressing heat in the workplace, and the previous speaker alluded to it as well, the Netherlands holds that in taking climate adaptation measures, regardless of the specific consequences of climate change they're trying to address, such as extreme heat or rising sea levels or more frequent storms, social dialogue must be leading. Measures must be imposed in consultation with governments, employees, and employers themselves, working together and joining up knowledge and power to identify problems as well as effective ways to address these. With regard to the growing impact of heat in the workplace, which in the Netherlands is an increasingly common phenomenon indeed, a one-size-fits-all solution simply does not exist. The Netherlands deem it crucial to strengthen tripartite dialogues between regulatory authorities, employers and employees on these issues. And another crucial consideration we take into account are the specific risks, vulnerabilities and needs of various sectors. The issues and solutions are vastly different for dissimilar sectors in the Dutch economy. Based on such social dialogue responsibilities, as well as the respective rights of employers, workers, and regulatory authorities, measures to address and mitigate extreme heat in the workplace can be put down in respective labor laws. In the Netherlands, we have done so after extensive and ongoing social dialogue for both heat in the workplace, as well as this more specific Dutch problem of workplaces being too cold rather than too hot. To make things a little bit more concrete, the tripartite social dialogue that I've just referred to found agreement amongst the 3 parties that the ideal working temperature in offices in the Netherlands is between 23 and 26 degrees Celsius. It was agreed that employees had the right to leave their office if the temperature topped 28 degrees. For physically intense work taking place outside, this threshold was agreed at 26 degrees Celsius when a light air breeze is present, and 25 degrees Celsius without such a breeze present. This example goes to show that concrete specific measures can be put into place after extensive consultation of employers, employees, and government authorities. A process that wonderfully ensures a buy-in by all the 3 parties after the respective regulations come into effect. Concluding, I've given you a brief overview of the need for multilateral supported action on climate adaptation, supported by a concrete example of the way in which the Netherlands endeavors to achieve climate adaptation, specifically on the issue of extreme heat at work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Van Dalen, for sharing your experiences and thoughts on how excessive heat creates occupational health risks and reduces work capacity and labor productivity. Now I turn to our next panelist, His Excellency Mr. Julian Braithwaite, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom in Geneva. As you know, UK is the president of COP26. It is said that climate change and inaction to tackle it are significant contributors to the global burden of diseases. We understand a suitable response to climate-induced health challenges are essential for a healthy recovery from COVID-19. Against this backdrop, may I ask Ambassador Braithwaite to shed some light on how the diplomatic community in Geneva can contribute more effectively to highlight the interlinkages of climate change and health. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rahman. And on behalf of the United Kingdom, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Bangladesh, as well as the whole membership of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, for your leadership on this agenda, and in particular on this agenda of climate change and health and disease. And it's really a pleasure to join this event today in the company of such distinguished speakers and fantastic to see so many participants with us online from time zones all around the world. So congratulations for a fantastic event. It'll come as no surprise to you that as part of the UK's presidency of COP26 jointly with Italy, raising ambition on climate change is one of our biggest priorities for 2021. This means three things. First, more ambition to adapt and build resilience. Secondly, more ambition to reduce emissions. And thirdly, more ambition to strengthen collaboration and support for developing countries. We took the difficult decision to postpone COP26 to November of this year in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. With this extra time, we know that our responsibility is to maximize progress and minimize disruption. The UK is urging every country to come forward as soon as possible ahead of COP26 with ambitious new climate commitments that will help us meet the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement. It's vital the world comes together if we're to stand a chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, as we've discussed. And it's certainly a big task, but with enough political will, we can make it a reality. And that's why the COP is so important as a mobilizer of that political will. Accelerating action on adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage is key because, unfortunately, as we've heard, we know that it's often the most vulnerable countries who are being hit hardest by the impact of climate change. And the work of the Climate Vulnerable Forum is so important in this regard, amplifying the voices of those most affected. In fact, Bangladesh's leadership on resilience was clearly demonstrated in the early warning and evacuation of millions of people from the path of super cyclone Umpan in May of last year. But the international community needs to do more to support countries who are vulnerable to climate-induced natural disasters. The UK is proud of the fact we have committed to doubling our climate finance for adaptation, but also for mitigation, rightly highlighted by His Excellency, the Foreign Minister, as critical, to £11.6 billion from 2021 this year to 2025. This will help developing countries to take action to tackle climate change. And we're encouraging other donors to set out bold new commitments to provide high quality and predictable climate finance. And as we recover from the coronavirus pandemic, every country faces a choice between laying the foundations for sound, sustainable and inclusive growth, which protects public health and creates employment in the industries of the future, or locking in polluting emissions for decades to come. We encourage countries to seize this opportunity to develop green, inclusive and resilient recovery plans that deliver for the economy, the planet and for public health. And as we just heard from Dr. Tedros, life-saving public health gains could come from successful climate change mitigation. For example, currently there are around 7 million annual deaths from air pollution globally. These deaths are preventable. We know that one of the major threats to clean air is traffic emissions. And so that's why the United Kingdom is seeking to double the pace of the global transition to zero emission vehicles. And we're going further and faster than ever to decarbonize transport, harnessing the power of clean green technology. Climate change also affects the resilience of health systems, as we've heard, negatively impacting the ability to effectively respond to climate-related health demands. The health sector is actually a substantial contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for around 4.6% of emissions globally. And this and their strong position of public trust makes health systems well placed to lead on emissions reduction and air quality improvement, something that we are looking at, not least in the context of the COP. At home in the UK's National Health Service, the NHS, is recognised as a global leader in health sector action on emission reduction and air quality improvement. And NHS England has set an ambitious target for the health system to reach net zero emissions by 2040. However, ambitions for health sector net zero must recognise that country health systems and health sector organisations are at different points regarding health system emissions and operate in diverse operational environments around the world. It is essential that we aim for ambitious commitments, but also give flexibility to develop tailored approaches with tailored ambitions on climate and health. International cooperation with buy-in from national governments, service providers and manufacturers is going to be essential for reaching net zero. The entire supply chain must collaborate to generate sustainable change. I'll leave my examples there, Ambassador, in the interest of time, Clearly, the Geneva diplomatic community does have a key role to play in this and in raising awareness of the links between public health and climate change, as well as driving multilateral collaboration. I must say, today's event is a very good example of just that role that we can collectively play. And I really wanted to thank Bangladesh for its leadership again for that. So together, we think we can agree an ambitious shared plan for action at COP26, and that, of course, we must break down the silos that prevent effective action, because the health of our planet, as well as the health of our citizens, depends on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Braithwaite, for sharing your views that a stronger global collaboration, including here in Geneva, can help achieve many beneficial outcomes in tackling climate-induced health challenges. Thank you once again. Now I turn to our next panelist, His Excellency Mr. Gian Lorenzo Conado.
Mustafiz, if you allow me, I have another program at 9 p.m. and it is 9:08. So if you excuse me, I would love to leave.
Thank you so much, sir, for staying with us for so long, sir. I know, sir, you're very busy. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Now it is all the webinars. I have another one at 9. So thank you for allowing me to go.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very
Now
much. Thank you very much, Minister. Okay.
Now I turn to our next panelist, His Excellency Mr. Gian Lorenzo Cornado, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Italy in Geneva. As the current G20 chair, Italy's focus, as we learned, is to work with the international community to overcome the great challenges of today, from tackling the pandemic to addressing climate change, from supporting innovation to overcoming poverty and inequality. Italy is also a partner country of COP26. With this in view, may I now invite Ambassador Cornado to share with us Italy's perspective on climate change. The floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the government of Bangladesh and the Climate Vulnerable Forum for hosting this webinar on climate change priorities on health, human rights, and labor, and for the kind invitation. Climate change is one of the biggest challenges of our time. The more we tackle this global issue, the more we realize the magnitude of the impact it has on so many aspects of our life. Biodiversity, ecosystems, human and animal health, human rights, gender issues, economy, agriculture are some of the sectors affected by climate change. As a country that has always been ambitious on climate action, Italy intends to reaffirm and strengthen its role towards a virtuous, ambitious, and supportive path. 2021 is a key year for the environment, since it will be marked by the Conference of Parties of the 3 Rio Conventions, as well as by the launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and by the UN Food System Summit. Moreover, the UN Conference on Oceans and the 5th United Nations Assembly on the Environment will also be held this year. Furthermore, Italy and the UK will lead multilateral efforts in their capacities of chairs of the G20 and of the G7 and as co-chairs of the UNFCCC COP26. During this year, we will therefore have the task to tackle climate change amidst the social, economic, and potential aftermath of the pandemic crisis. This COVID-19 crisis has opened up new scenarios of global climate strategies. Today, we have the opportunity and the moral duty to build back better and greener, and I'm confident that the Paris Agreement, the 2030 Agenda, and the European Green Deal will guide us towards the post-pandemic recovery. In a fragmented international system, multilateral fora such as the G7, G20 need to speak with a single voice when it comes to addressing the most urgent global challenges. This year, the 2 agendas are aligned in identifying climate change as a high priority. The G7 is in fact focusing on issues such as global health, climate, and trade, while the G7 presidency agenda is centered around 3 main pillars: people, planet, and prosperity. Allow me to briefly illustrate the role of Italy in 2021, both as a partner for the COP26 and as G20 chair. The 26th conference of the parties of the UN Convention on Combating Climate Change will be hosted by UK in Glasgow in November, while Italy will host the pre-COP, the ministerial preparatory meeting, and the Youth for Climate Driving Ambition in September in Milan. We chose to host these two events back to back to underline and promote the engagement of the young generations in the decision-making process, because the actions we undertake today will have an impact on their future. The idea is to channel in positive and constructive ways the youth mobilization that is taking place worldwide on the topic of climate change, in order to make young people responsible and to recognize them as key players in the climate action. As I previously mentioned, the G20 agenda rests upon three main pillars: people, planet, prosperity. In 2021, in addition to the ministerial meetings and the G20 summit, Italy will host the Global Health Summit, organized jointly with the European Commission, as further proof of our commitment on this crucial issue. As we know, the pandemic has a profound impact on the health of humans worldwide. It affects people's livelihoods, our economies, international trade, hampering our ability to fully prosper and express our potential. It must be addressed as a planetary issue. But we have to remember that there are undeniable interconnections also between human rights, environmental protection, and the impact of climate change. Loss of biodiversity, extinction of species, pollution, and the overall degradation of the Earth ecosystems have a significant impact at global level on the full enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the right to safe drinking water and sanitation. Because, as we know, climate change does not impact all persons the same way, it exposes to increasing risks, mainly those belonging to vulnerable groups. As a member of the Human Rights Council, Italy has been actively engaging in the discussions on the Human Rights Council resolution on human rights and environment. In particular, we supported the process to recognize the right to a healthy environment as a fundamental right of the individual, and as such, Italy has been among the main sponsors of Resolution 45/30 on realizing the rights of the child through a healthy environment. Concerning the labor and climate change perspective, a green recovery from the pandemic crisis will be essential to achieve sustainable development as well as global economic prosperity. Climate and environmental change have constantly been recalled by ILO. The transition to low carbon, environmentally sustainable economies and societies could become a strong driver of employment creation, skills upgrading, social justice, and poverty eradication towards a greener, inclusive, and sustainable recovery and a better use of renewable energies. Reskill and upskill the workforce will also be of the utmost importance. The Italian presidency of the G20 will support education, capacity building, and training, with particular attention to the younger ones. It is going to be an intense, busy year for Italy and for the whole international community on the climate change front. By working together, we'll be able to recover from the crisis and seize the opportunity to build back a better future, learning from our shared multilateral experiences, and ensure that efficient, innovative tools and technologies become the basis for more resilient, sustainable, and greener growth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Coronado. Indeed, Italy can play an important role in combating climate change in a global context, in particular in the areas of dialogue between science and society. We hope that as the G20 chair and a partner country of COP26, Italy would contribute to advocate for an internationally coordinated climate action. This brings me to the last panelist of today's discussion. Climate change is one of the greatest threats to human rights of our generation. Indeed, it is high time to discuss this one more intensively in the Human Rights Council, while highlighting the importance of having a dedicated special procedure mandate on climate change. Now I give the floor to our last panelist, Mr. Samuel Langui Jr., Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, to share his views on the possible creation of a special rapporteur on climate change in the Human Rights Council. Mr. Langui, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Before I proceed, please allow me to convey my ambassador's sincere apologies and regrets for not being able to attend this important webinar as initially agreed and planned due to an urgent emergency. Good afternoon, Excellencies and distinguished participants. The Republic of the Marshall Islands is pleased to join you today, speaking as a member of the CVF Troika. At the outset, we congratulate Bangladesh for convening this event and for his leadership as chair of this August forum. I am pleased to speak particularly to the topic of climate change and human rights, although we are equally very supportive of strengthened efforts by the WHO and ILO in the area of climate change. This work is vital to protecting our health and workers from climate change and to help us leverage the best possible dividends from climate action in terms of health and jobs. This is especially important given the COVID-19 pandemic, and so we are also strongly support the WHO Manifesto for a Healthy Recovery from COVID-19. With regards to human rights, this has been a core focus of our diplomacy. The Marshall Islands ran and secured the first seat for a Micronesian nation on the Human Rights Council in order to promote stronger efforts by the HRC to tackle climate change. Climate change impedes individuals' rights to food, life, health, housing, a healthy environment, access to land and energy, and even self-determination. Now more than ever, a stronger human rights-based approach to ambitious climate change action is needed. Addressing climate change is imperative to ensuring the core human rights are upheld. We remain very supportive of the CVF call to establish a dedicated special rapporteur on climate change and human rights. This will give communities like ours on the front line of the climate crisis the chance to have the threats to our rights addressed by the international community. Last October, the foreign ministers of the Pacific Islands Forum also joined in affirming the need for this new mandate and for the HRC to resolve to create it during this year's June session. The Marshall Islands president has stated that climate change is this century's greatest threat to human rights. As vulnerable countries, our rights are already severely compromised due to the impact of climate change, and our futures hang in the balance depending on nations that should be taken right now, but have typically been too little too late. Indeed, in 2019, the High Commissioner recognized that the world has never seen a threat to human rights of this scope. Preparing for more action in the Council, the Marshall Islands led a joint statement supported by 14 member states during the 44th HRC session last year, calling for the creation of the new climate mandate under the Council. In that statement, we highlighted that a comprehensive body of knowledge has emerged from all the work of the Climate Resolution and its core group. Multiple thematic reports and panels, the UPR, different treaty bodies, and the special procedures inclusion of climate considerations in their work. All this clearly shows that climate issues cuts across all mandates. The special procedures have rightfully included climate change considerations in their work, but we must not lose sight of the bigger picture, even as we continue to deepen our analysis. Our statement asked what future generations would say about how we acted, looking back on this council. Youth today demand leadership. It is all their futures that also hang in the balance. As was asserted by the High Commissioner, we must act now, we must act urgently, and we must deploy every tool at our disposal. We are convinced that the creation of a new mandate will constitute the most effective step towards strengthening the human rights system's efforts to address the climate emergency. It would provide important additional means to raise awareness and better inform governments, promote ambitious efforts to protect rights, and constitute a major step towards the protection of the rights of the world's most vulnerable people. Chair, as you know, we have made an initial allocation of $100,000 US dollars from the new CVF and V20 Joint Multi-Donor Fund, the board of which you have been presiding over for the CVF presidency. Like Bangladesh, the Marshall Islands is a founding donor to this fund, which is also supported by a number of independent foundations and Germany's Environment Ministry. These resources will be available to support the Office of the High Commissioner's efforts on a new climate rights mandate, should the HRC be in a position to agree on its creation. We therefore look forward to working with you all to build the necessary consensus within the HRC in order to turn our vision for a new climate mandate at the Council into reality this June. I thank you, Chair and Excellencies. Como dada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lermy, for your remarks highlighting the need of a dedicated special rapporteur on climate change to help promote urgent, ambitious, and right-based climate actions. Financial constraints are often mentioned as a deterrent or discouragement to create a new mandate. As you have correctly informed, the CVF has already allocated 100,000 US dollar from its own fund to support a new climate mandate. I'm sure others will see value in investing on such a mandate for strengthening climate actions and protecting the rights of the most vulnerable. Distinguished participants, we have heard the last speaker of today's panel. Let us now open the floor for comments and questions. I would request you to click on the raise hand box of this platform if you wish to take the floor. You can also write in the chat box showing expression of interest. We already have a few interested names. First, I give the floor to Ambassador Hans-Peter Jugel, Deputy Permanent Representative of Germany. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished panelists. First of all, we would like to thank the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh, as well as the CVF Secretariat for organizing this timely event, and also the panelists for their engagement and for their commitment. Climate change exacerbates existing vulnerabilities and inequalities, threatens diverse rights such as the right to life, health, food, self-determination, housing, or the rights to safe water and sanitation, and is increasingly a driver of conflict and migration. Due to the increasing scarcity of elementary resources such as clean drinking water and fertile farmland, climate change is also driving conflict and migration and even threatening the existence of entire states, as we also heard today. That is why climate and security were priority issues for our Security Council membership in 2019 and 2020. Existing discrimination and/or social inequality exacerbate the impact of climate change on women, especially if they are part of marginalized communities. Social dialogue and international cooperation are crucial policy levers and vital for ensuring social acceptance and public support for the measures needed to fight climate change. It is important to link climate change to social and employment policies through social dialogue and integrated policy planning. So we encourage governments and the social partners to promote the inclusion of environmental provisions and green clauses in the international framework agreements and collective agreements, as well as to develop environmental, social, and governance policy in private. A greener and circular economy means new growth and decent work opportunities. We can gain in this endeavor. A human rights-based climate policy must take into account the rights of vulnerable groups, as well as the gender dimensions of climate change. This year, we would like to strengthen the Geneva Pledge within the Human Rights Council and thus advocate for a stronger exchange of knowledge between UNFCCC and the Human Rights Council. Close coordination between the two forums is the best way to ensure that climate policy is based on human rights. In this regard, we also stand ready to support OHCHR's work at the interface of human rights and climate change. Germany provides targeted support for projects, and it has been mentioned, that address the impact of climate change on human rights and ensure the participation and empowerment of vulnerable groups. In conclusion, apropos support, we are open to consider supporting the idea of a special rapporteur on climate change and look forward to engaging actively in the discussion of this resolution. And at the same time, we hope that we can also achieve a much stronger focus on human rights in the annual resolution. We are looking forward to discuss it with partners. So thank you again for this excellent event and all the interventions.
Thank you, Ambassador. I now give the floor to Professor Salim Haq, is the chair of the Expert Advisory Group for the Climate Vulnerable Forum and senior advisor on locally led adaptation with Global Center on Adaptation. Mr. Haq, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellency, and congratulations to the Bangladesh Mission in New York for organizing such an excellent event, bringing together these three very important areas, human rights, health, and labor, which had not previously been closely linked. So congratulations, and it's very good to see WHO, ILO, and others also coming on board. I have had the privilege of being associated as an advisor to the Climate Vulnerable Forum from its very inception, when former President Nasheed started it in Male many years ago. And currently I'm chairing the expert advisory group for the Climate Vulnerable Forum. And in that context, I would just like to share one thing. I won't repeat what others have said on how do we build on these connections between these three nexus, health, labor, and human rights, and focus on youth, which has been mentioned already by several, and I will just elaborate on that. Last year in September, Bangladesh launched, in fact, Ms. Saima Wajid, as the ambassador of vulnerability, launched the Youth Adaptation Network, which has now become a global youth adaptation network under the aegis of the Global Center on Adaptation. And the Bangladesh Youth Network is run by my institute in Bangladesh. And this is now, to us, a major positive initiative that brings together the health issues out of the COVID-19 pandemic and how to deal with that, together with jobs issues, and particularly looking at potential for jobs in adapting to climate change. We believe that adaptation to climate change, particularly at the local level with local communities and young people in those local communities, represent a major significant opportunity for job creation, not only at the national level, but indeed also at the global and international level, sharing that knowledge, South-South exchanges between young people, as well as South to North exchanges between young people on how to adapt to the impacts of climate change, because unfortunately, climate change impacts are now happening in every single country in the world, including the rich countries. So there's a great deal of knowledge exchange to be done. And particularly speaking about the upcoming COP26 with the joint presidency of the UK in Glasgow in November, and then the Italian presidency and the youth event in September in Milan. I think these would be excellent areas in which we can collaborate with the Climate Vulnerable Forum and its activities going forward. And I look forward to exploring these options with everyone going forward. Thank you very much, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. Haq. Next is Ms. Francisca Mingron from the Center for International Environment Law. The floor is yours, madam. Oh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. On behalf of the Center for International Environmental Law, I would like to thank the Permanent Mission of Bangladesh and the CVF Secretariat for inviting us to this important conversation with a very impressive lineup of speakers. I would like to offer a few thoughts and reactions based on today's discussion. As we've heard today from our distinguished panelists, climate change is a very complex issue which intersects with human rights, labor, health, along with other dimensions, of course. And while human rights institutions in Geneva are already playing a crucial role, still many gaps need to be filled. And in this context, we strongly support the proposal to create a new UN Special Rapporteur on human rights and climate change, brought forward by the CVF and other countries. As regional consultations with civil society organizations and indigenous people organizations from over than 50 countries have demonstrated, the time has really come for the Human Rights Council to create this new mandate. A new special rapporteur on human rights and climate change would be essential to advance the understanding of the human rights impacts of climate change, provide guidance for stronger human rights-based climate action, and create synergies with other mandate holders, exploring how climate change is intersecting with pre-existing phenomena and vulnerabilities. It could also offer expertise to support governments' efforts to align the implementation of the Paris Agreement with their human rights obligations. We're pleased to see that with the leadership of the Marshall Islands and Bangladesh in their capacity as former and current presidents of the CVFs respectively, strong momentum has been built around the creation of this new mandate, hopefully for later this year in June 2021. Looking at UNFCCC, important issues must still be addressed, and COP26 will have a central role to play to ensure that human rights guide international cooperation and climate change. We're pleased to hear that the UK presidency will put a strong focus on loss and damage, along with ambition and other important themes. For the effective implementation of the Paris Agreement and to build further public support, key decisions expected at the COP26, like means of implementation, climate education, market mechanisms, just to name a few examples, must be fully informed by human rights. So with this in mind, we look forward to hearing more about how civil society and indigenous peoples' organizations can best support the Climate Vulnerable Forums, presidency, and other states to ensure that the Human Rights Council establishes the new special rapporteur on human rights and climate change, as well as to ensure that human rights can continue to inform the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Francisca. Now I recognize Ms. Farah Kabir, Country Director, ActionAid Bangladesh. The floor is yours, madam.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you to the Permanent Mission in Geneva. And I think it's an excellent webinar where the three dimensions or three different aspects are being discussed. And I want to also not repeat what has been said. I think we have established that the crisis, the importance of coming together, and the different aspects of our lives needs to be connected. What I would like to emphasize here is that we have seen the leadership and visionary leadership of countries like Bangladesh, who are most affected, have been recognized as being the most vulnerable. But we have tried to find our own solutions and adaptation and so on. But what it does today is when you're bringing the aspect of human rights, labor, and climate change together, let us not repeat what has not worked previously. Let us also try and learn from what has already been said previously, especially when it comes to young people and their lives, their skills, the need to transition to green economy and the support to them. The need to have gender responsive public services. You know, when we're talking about health, then we have to make sure we don't repeat what was there, which was not necessarily catering to all the citizens, and there was gaps. Let's be honest, that there were serious gaps. And what climate change has done, you know, when we talk about the impacts of climate change, we're talking about flood. We're talking about repeated floods. In the midst of COVID pandemic, we had Amphan and 3-4 rounds of floods in Bangladesh. So you have a pandemic, you have a serious health issue, and yet the community had to deal with repeated floods. And this has implication for the women, the young people, whether it's any kind of waterborne diseases, skin diseases, respiratory problem. So we have to make sure, and this also has a serious implication on the reproductive health of women, and it's an intergenerational. You know, when the sea level is rising, the salt water, the salinity, and I mean, I'm not going to go into the details, but what it means, it's got an intergeneration. So we need to correct this, and we need to also work with the indigenous and the local adaptation, and we have to see that people have been coping with, and some of this has been very useful. But we have to be careful that it should not always be just adaptation. The emphasis on the mitigation, the emphasis on the responsibility of the countries with highest level of emission, holding them accountable is so critical. And COP26 should be about results. I mean, I heard His Excellency, the representative from the UK and Italy. While we create the space and the platform, we also want to see what actions have been taken and the accountability aspect of it. And, we keep talking about finances. $1 trillion could be mobilized because of the pandemic. So if we are serious about the planetary crisis and we want to link it with human rights, with labor, with health, I believe you all in your leadership can hold your countries and your governments accountable and global leadership to move. It's just a question of political will. So I will end by saying, please bring the lens and the focus, the spotlight on things that have not worked, and let us move and make things work. Let's remember who are the most impacted and affected. Let's remember that the pandemic has shown how vulnerable we are, and irrespective of where you are, how developed, how technologically advanced you may be, there are certain things that does not spare. So in a way, it was an equalizer. Well, not anymore, because the health access to health and services. And I'm also very proud because I come from a country which is already providing the vaccinations, and while others are struggling. So having said that, let's try and make that commitment and to keep the women, the young people, and the youth in the center. And we also have to deal with what has happened in the last 1+ year due to the pandemic, which is the increase in domestic violence, the increase in mental health issues, the loss of job, again, causing mental health issues. So we need to have a separate support, not just set up a separate rapporteur at the UN, but it should be backed by programs and finances and interventions. So thank you so much, Ambassador, for letting me speak, and congratulations for this webinar.
Thank you, Madam. I recognize UPEG Miambiante has requested for the floor. If you so wish, please take the floor. Thank you. So I don't see Ms. Miambiante taking the floor. So I don't see any more requests for the floor, and also we are running out of time. May I go back to the panelists if you want to respond to any of the questions or comments, or add anything very briefly, maybe for 1 minute or so. If any of you are willing to take the floor, either raise your hand or just unmute and speak to make it simple. Distinguished panelists.
No, thank you so much. I think much has been said. And as you mentioned, we're running out of time. But thank you. It's been a very good conference.
Thank you, Excellency. If I hear no more requests or intention to take, okay, I see Ambassador of UK as
Excellency, Excellency, sir, I would also have to go because we planned for 8:30. I'm very sorry, but I'll wait for a while.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for your time and staying with us for so long. Ambassador of UK, Ambassador Braithwaite.
Thank you, Ambassador Rahman. Really, just to be extremely brief and to thank you for organising this. I think on behalf of all the panelists, I think we've just had a very rich discussion, and I think it gives us a lot of food for thought, particularly I think for ourselves and for Italy as we think about the run-up through to COP26. So thank you to everybody for participating. Thank you, Bangladesh, for organising. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for your contribution. Any more speakers?
Don't do that now. Can finish it.
Distinguished participants, we are nearing end of this program. Now I have the honor to invite His Excellency Mr. Genevieve Kebede Korsho, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Ethiopia, to make his closing remarks as the CVF Troika Ambassador. Ambassador.
Thank you, ambassadors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We have had a very rich discussion this afternoon, morning, or evening. Allow me to express my thanks on behalf of the forum to His Excellency, Mr. Mustafa Fizur Rahman, for hosting this virtual event to exchange views on the perspective of the nexus between climate change, health, human rights, and labor. Excellencies, colleagues, today's virtual event was timely and pertinent to us as we are witnessing the loss of millions of lives and jobs, and numerous businesses remain closed. Climate change is undoubtedly one of the greatest threats to human rights of our generation, posing a serious risk to the fundamental rights to life, health, food, and adequate standard of living of individuals and communities across the world. That is why it needs emergency action. I was very much encouraged to hear the rich contributions from so many of the members here today. I believe that today's exchange highlighted well the importance of our collaboration in this forum to advance our concerns. I am sure you agree with me that the discussion was also a clear testimony of our commitment to the Paris Agreement, as it highlighted the goal we set in keeping rising global temperature to 1.5 degree pre-industrial level. It is evident that the danger of inaction to climate change is real and here to stay with us. Recently, my country, Ethiopia, announced its 15 years ambitious national adaptation plan aimed at reducing the vulnerability of the country to the adverse impacts of climate change. It has taken bold leadership on climate action by launching its ambitious climate resilient green economy strategy that aspires to build a carbon neutral and resilient economy by 2030. Ethiopia has intensified its commitment in the fight against climate change by launching a Green Legacy National Flag Initiative in 2019, aimed at planting 20 billion tree seedlings within 4 years. In this regard, more than 9 billion seedlings have been planted over the last 2 years. Excellencies, colleagues, climate change is a global issue that no country can respond to on its own. It is important that we work for a world that is ready to take on responsibilities. In that spirit, we should be able to contribute to the advocacy we are making as CVF members and is in all other platforms. We believe that the importance of keeping up our advocacy in the area of health, human rights, labor, and migration and displacement is paying off. It is also gratifying to see that our views are receiving continued appreciation and recognition in different institutions. Let me conclude by saying that we don't have enough time to address this pressing global issue at length. Once again, it was a great pleasure to have this fruitful discussion. Without doubt, the purpose of the meeting has been
accomplished. Thank you once again and wish you a very pleasant evening. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our program today. Our deep appreciation to all distinguished attendees for their presence, participation, and particularly for staying with us till the end. Before I conclude, I express my sincere gratitude to the CVF Secretariat and the Global Action on Adaptation for their all-out support and cooperation. I'd also like to thank Mr. Mohammad Abul Kalam Azad, Special Envoy of the CVF Presidency of Bangladesh, for his encouragement and support. With this, I call the event to a close. Thank you all. Stay safe. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank
you
you
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.